This is the focus of today's yarn, all thanks to the Hocken collection, which is housed in the very same hometown. An older version of Ben Rudd, outside his one-room stone cottage. Those that got inside described it as Spartan, would have had to have crouched to have got through his door. A Bible and a couple of books, a single oil lamp, a side of bacon hanging on a hook, and some other tools of a simple life. The knee-high to a grasshopper Rudd was born in England in 1854 and arrived in New Zealand in his 20s, where he set himself up as a roving Dunedin gardener. Think Jim's mowing, except with a horse and a cart. In 1884 he purchased a property on the outskirts of Dunedin called Woodside and lived there from 1884 to 1919 on what is still called Rudd Road. Let's get our bearings here, fine people, with a sense to be tuning in to my channel and not married at first sight. One episode of which would be enough for me to Google Tibetan Hermit cave for sale. Thanks to COVID, the cost of an average Kiwi cave being way above my budget. Woodside became his first residence on Flagstaff, which was a farmlet type of a setup. Here he is on his toothless bay mare, Old Kit, in 1904. A literal overview. You'll see his subsistence living operation, with a few garden caches on the side, was relatively close to Dunedin, and with it annoying bipedal apes. To add more context, when Rudd first went onto the hill of Flagstaff, Dunedin's population was just 50,000. In 1919 he sold his property and moved back into the city, which didn't work out too well. His misanthropic tendencies soon came to the fore. 2 years later he purchased 112 acres, again back on Flagstaff, number 2 on the hill. It was now 1921 and he was aged 67. He planted gardens and native bush. Apparently the offspring of the original raspberry brambles and indigenous plants are still up there on the hill, as are the remains of his stone fences he built by hand. Dunedin's population had gone up by 50% to 75,000 at that stage, and the expansion encroachments of the city would prove problematic for Mr. Benjamin. This is where the stone hut in the photo was built and where his photographic record largely begins. It would be here Rudd would be found by members of the local Otago tramping club in dire straits health-wise and carried the 3 kilometres to the road, then driven to the hospital. There he died, aged 76. The year was 1930. Later, the tramping club would purchase the land and build a hut, which constantly got broken into, therefore they put a shelter up instead. That still remains to this day. The photo the tramping club graciously provides gives you a before and after setting. Dedicated the hillside farm area with his name. Well done, the Otago Tramping and Mountaineering Club. That's the bare bones of the Ben Rudd story. What I'm going to do now is concentrate on the other interactions he had with the Dunedinites over the years at locations A and B. Interlopers onto his property over the years fell roughly into 2 main categories. Day hikers looking for a place to be in nature close to the city, either not aware or not caring they were on private property. Feckless teenagers who taunted the hell out of the diminutive old bloke, knowing they were going to get a bite. Depending on which way the wind was blowing that day, the often over-possessive and cantankerous Rudd didn't appear to differentiate between the two. As his run-ins and times in court facing charges attest, let's get to them. There's quite a few to get through, by the way. And sometimes he wasn't the one getting prosecuted. First up in the papers was when he was facing charges in 1886 for shooting John Waldie. Waldie indicated he and a friend encountered Rudd and he called him by his nickname Uncle Ben. After a hail of rocks didn't dissuade Waldie and his mate, Rudd brought out his gun and shot both Waldie and his horse. I'm unsure as to the calibre of the weapon, but I'm presuming it to be a shotgun. In court facing attempted murder charges, it came out that both defendants had taunted and antagonised Rudd in the past. His lawyer successfully argued they were merely warning shots and he was found not guilty. 3 years later, he wasn't so lucky, and for good reason. Unwittingly, Susan Hornsby and her sister encountered Rudd on a stroll, and he reacted by punching her in the face, pulling her by the hair and giving her a kicking. He was fined and lucky not to go into the slammer. Skip to 1894, and in another case of shoot first and ask questions later, he attacked a trespasser with a hayfork, delivering a blow to his head that fractured his skull. Another fine. By now you are seeing a pattern forming, and the city was divided as to whether he was a tormented man seeking solitude or a raving loony with a short fuse, as were the judges, because yet more cases were to come before Otago courts, and some I've probably missed. 1902 he encountered Mr. Green and his son out on a weekend stroll. On learning he was on private property via explosive, Green and his lad retreated back to the road, where Rudd was waiting. The 4-foot-something Rudd went ballistic and a wrestling match ensued. Rudd's lawyer attempted to unsuccessfully argue they were looking for trouble. He lost. Fine number 3. Rudd now went on the offensive. He started to formally complain to the police about trespassers, and in a couple of instances those resulted in court cases transpiring. In 1907 a picnicker was charged with trespass and assault, which he got off. 2 youths weren't so lucky in 1909. They were found shooting on Flagstaff, and when Rudd challenged them, they set their hunting dogs on him, and in the ensuing fisticuffs knocked him unconscious. More fines, this time for them. As the city encroached more and more, cars were now in virtually every garage. So did locals traipsing onto his property, particularly on the weekends. His hut and the volatile nature became a good night's larriking for the locals. In one incident his ducks were poisoned, another picnickers lit a fire which got out of control. He didn't pick a good spot to be a recluse, nor was he a total anchorite. In a previous video I've covered the story of Japanese tourist Keiko Agatsuma, who holed up in a cave on Stewart Island in 1978. These cases of self-enforced isolation are invariably complex. Subsequent to producing that particular video, linked below by the way, I was marshalling for an ultramarathon, and in the middle of the night I spoke to a bloke who knew her personally. He was the warden at the dock hut where she was staying for a while. According to him, she went bush because she was in a loveless marriage of convenience, and her raison d'etre became getting away as far as she could from her life in Japan. Nothing in the story I read about Benjamin Rudd gave us a clue as to his need to live in seclusion. Ben Rudd was a man of contradictions. He did have supporters and friends who visited him though. The tramping club pictured became very matey. His diminutive size, which is a euphemistic term for short ass, is well apparent in this snap. He was also matey with his customers from the gardening business in his time in town, and they popped by as well. So he wasn't a grouch at 24/7, and just a person you wouldn't want to poke, especially when armed. So that's it today for Uncle Ben. I hope you enjoyed this tale, and will check out the video on the Stewart Island Hermit I just mentioned. Nudge nudge, wink wink. I'm constantly working on new stuff, have projects on the go, left, right and centre. Even I don't know what I'm going to do next time. So why not subscribe and find out? You don't have to be a Kiwi, by the way, to enjoy these tales. Bye for now.